Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal exciting events for the next 2 weeks from June 23 to July 4, 2025. First, during the week of June 23 to 27, while Portia was consumed by a storm of anger and emotional volatility that sent shockwaves through her home, Trina found herself silently unraveling beneath the weight of a different kind of anxiety. Her concern was not directed at the familiar family tension but rather fixated entirely on Kai, whose recent decisions stirred a tempest within her. When Kai quietly revealed that he intended to accept an internship under Drew, it sent Trina into a spiral of worry. She couldn't shake the feeling that Drew's influence was not only dangerous but meticulously calculated, and the idea of Kai falling under his orbit felt like a slow-motion collapse she was powerless to stop. Trina had watched Drew manipulate others before, and now the thought of Kai being absorbed into that web left her unsettled, fearful that this internship might be the opening move in a much darker game. Curtis, still clinging to the belief that he could keep his family from fracturing completely, stepped into the situation with quiet but firm resolve. He knew Trina better than most and could sense her distrust growing by the day. To counteract that, he doubled down on reassurance, telling her, without words but through presence and action, that he believed in Kai's judgment. But beneath his calm facade, Curtis understood the stakes. He had seen Drew's shifts in demeanor, the veiled threats, and the political maneuvering that had become more brazen over time. If Kai was going to work under Drew, Curtis needed to stay close enough to intervene before things spiraled out of control. His hope, however fragile, was that Jacinda could be the key to dismantling Drew's carefully constructed facade before it was too late. Jacinda, who had long observed the power players from the shadows, was stepping into the light with dangerous knowledge and impeccable timing. If she moved strategically, as Curtis hoped, she could expose Drew's manipulations from the inside. Her proximity to Drew's inner circle and her unassuming demeanor gave her the perfect cover to slip through the cracks in his armor. She had already begun collecting information, storing away fragments of whispered conversations and encrypted emails, all pieces of a puzzle she intended to unleash when the time was right. Her allegiance, while still unclear to most, was quietly leaning in favor of justice, and if she succeeded, she wouldn't just bring Drew down. She might very well redefine the balance of power within the Quartermain world. Meanwhile, Nina was watching the unfolding chaos from her own corner of Port Charles, her fears tightening around her like a noose. Willow's decision to move forward with the wedding to Drew, despite every warning sign, was nothing short of terrifying to her. She could see Drew's tactics for what they were, charm laced with coercion, promises masking ulterior motives. And she knew that Willow, in her desperation for family and security, was walking blindly into a trap. Nina's pleas for Willow to delay the wedding fell on deaf ears, leaving her with no choice but to seek help from a source she once considered an enemy. The stakes were no longer just personal, they were potentially dangerous, and Nina was running out of time. In a twist no one could have predicted, Nina found herself forming an alliance that defied every expectation. It wasn't born out of trust, but necessity. Her new partner in this effort had their own reasons for wanting Drew exposed and disarmed, and together they began plotting a quiet sabotage. Whether their plan would work remained uncertain, but one thing was clear, Nina was done waiting for someone else to save Willow. She was stepping into the storm herself, determined to unmask the man behind the curtain before he could destroy another life. As the hearing approached and the wedding loomed, the line between love and manipulation, truth and illusion, grew thinner by the hour. Second, behind the scenes of the unfolding chaos, new revelations were quietly making their way to Drew, pieces of information that, if pieced together correctly, could blow apart the fragile foundation he had so carefully built. Whispers circulating through the legal corridors and vague insinuations from previously silent allies began to converge on a single damning possibility: someone had bribed the judge who presided over the custody battle. Drew, obsessed with maintaining control and projecting the image of a man who won fair and square, began to suspect that his recent legal triumph might have come at the cost of ethical compromise. But the irony was sharp. In his desperate pursuit of credibility, he had become a pawn in a much darker scheme he didn't fully comprehend. His mind raced through the possibilities, landing on Michael as the most likely culprit. Michael had motive, money, and influence. He had everything necessary to orchestrate a judicial bribe if he believed it would protect his children or his legacy. Drew, still grappling with the bitterness of their broken trust, was quick to assume that Michael had gone behind his back to secure a courtroom victory that Drew had convinced himself he earned. But what Drew didn't yet realize was that his accusations were aimed in the wrong direction. The real puppeteer, Sidwell, had moved in silence, purchasing favor from the judge not for Michael's benefit, but for his own future leverage over Drew. Sidwell's fingerprints were nowhere to be seen, his manipulation buried under layers of plausible deniability, but the consequences of his actions were already reverberating across every relationship Drew had tried to preserve. At the Quartermain estate, Willow was facing revelations of a different kind. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a lingering sense that something had changed in Michael, drew her attention with mounting urgency. Updates about Michael's whereabouts, demeanor, and mood began trickling in through the family grapevine, suggesting that he was no longer resigned to watching Drew marry Willow in silence. The thought of Michael confronting her again brought a flood of conflict, regret for what had been lost, guilt for what she had chosen, and fear that she might once again be wrong about the man she was preparing to marry. For all her resolve to move forward, Willow could feel Michael's shadow growing longer behind her, a reminder of a truth she hadn't yet dared to speak. If Michael were to discover the impending wedding, and all signs pointed to the fact that he soon would, there was little doubt he would act. Not with violence, but with clarity, with the calm but cutting insistence of someone who had seen enough. He would not beg, he would not plead, but he would demand that Willow confront what had become increasingly obvious: Drew was not her savior. He was a master manipulator, a man who dressed coercion in the language of love and made her believe that self-sacrifice was strength. Michael had tried to protect her once before, but now he would try to wake her up, not for his sake, but for hers. He knew that Drew's power over Willow was not built on truth, but on fear, guilt, and a carefully cultivated dependence that masqueraded as devotion. As these threads began to pull tighter, the question loomed larger: how long could Drew hold the illusion together? With Jacinda potentially undermining him from within, with Nina forming alliances in the shadows, and with Michael preparing to make his voice heard once more, the noose around Drew's secrets was beginning to tighten. If the truth about the judge's bribery came to light, especially with proof that Drew knew and allowed it to benefit him, it could be the final blow. Not just to his custody case, but to his public persona, his business ties, and his already splintered relationships. What began as a calculated path to victory was quickly becoming a trap of his own making, and Willow might not be the only one poised to walk away when the mask finally slipped. Third, Brooke Lynn stood at a distance, watching a scene unfold that instantly ignited something feral inside her. The sight of Lulu wrapped in Joe's arms wasn't just a provocation, it was a dagger. The embrace was too close, too familiar, too easy, and it sent Brooke Lynn spiraling into a place she hadn't visited since the early days of being a mother. The connection between Lulu and Gio, whether intentional or not, pierced her with a painful truth. She might have hidden the circumstances of Joe's parentage for years, but she could not control his affections now. To Brooke Lynn, it felt like Lulu was not only encroaching on a relationship that wasn't hers to claim but was actively stealing what little maternal claim Brooke Lynn had finally begun to build. Her hands trembled with rage, but her mind was sharper than ever. She wouldn't confront Lulu immediately. No, Brooke Lynn would do what she had learned best: gather leverage and strike with precision. Her first move came through Marco, who had been circling the hospital halls long enough to know things others did not. Brooke Lynn cornered him with an intensity that made it clear she wasn't interested in small talk. Marco, eager to stay in her good graces, didn't hesitate. He fed her the scraps she needed: rumors about Britt Westbourne, long-suppressed truths about the timeline of her disappearance, whispers of forged records that never added up. To most, it might have seemed unrelated to Lulu, but Brooke Lynn's mind worked in connections. If she could expose anything that discredited Lulu's past, especially if it tied into Britt's mysterious involvement or her proximity to Gio at the time of his birth. She could undermine Lulu's growing influence over her son. Brooke Lynn didn't want to hurt Gio, but in her eyes, Lulu was a threat to their fragile relationship, and threats had to be neutralized. Elsewhere in Port Charles, Alexis was grappling with her own battles, ones that had nothing to do with motherhood but everything to do with control. Her tense conversation with Elizabeth had started with civility but quickly unraveled. Liz assured her that the accident, the one that had nearly ruined everything, was still safely buried in silence, and she would keep it that way for Christina's sake. But Alexis wasn't satisfied. She needed more than promises, she needed reassurances carved in stone. She sensed that Rick's return wasn't random, and with Ava circling back into town like a storm uninvited, the timing of everything was too perfect. There were too many pieces on the board and not enough players she trusted. She watched Liz closely, trying to determine whether her old friend had been manipulated into silence, or worse, was willingly complicit in a cover-up that had deeper roots than either of them wanted to admit. The strain between Alexis and Liz could very well crack open another layer of secrets surrounding Rick and Ava. Alexis had long suspected that Rick was operating with a hidden agenda, but if Liz had any inkling that blackmail was involved, especially connected to Daisy's baptism or the events that led up to it, this confrontation could be the moment it all began to unravel. Ava, always a master of coercion, had shown a peculiar interest in Rick's reemergence, and Alexis wondered if the two had more in common than just their sordid past. If Rick had used Daisy's accident, or even Christina's guilt, to pull strings behind the scenes, Alexis would find out. And if Ava had played any role in that manipulation, then it was only a matter of time before their uneasy peace became open war. Meanwhile, at the church where Daisy's baptism was about to take place, a different kind of tension was building beneath the surface of what should have been a joyful day. Jason and Carly stood quietly near the entrance, observing the gentle innocence of the ceremony and letting their minds wander back in time. The sight of Daisy in white brought memories of Michael flooding to the surface. His early years, his quiet resilience, the times when their family felt whole despite the chaos that surrounded them. It should have been a day of peace, of nostalgic smiles and silent prayers for better futures. But Port Charles rarely allowed such luxuries. Something darker was looming, a sense of dread crawling in the shadows just outside the sanctuary. As the ceremony unfolded, rumors of Sonny's latest power move buzzed through the undercurrents of the city. Some whispered he was planning a counterstrike against an unnamed enemy, others claimed law enforcement was closing in and preparing an arrest. Either way, the celebration teetered on the edge of disaster. All it would take was one phone call, one headline, or one uninvited guest to turn a holy moment into a battlefield. The baptism could be remembered not as Daisy's spiritual awakening but as the setting for Sonny's downfall, or worse, his final stand. And as the candles flickered beside the altar, every breath in the room felt like it might be the last one taken in peace. Finally, during the week of June 30th to July 4th, the aftershocks of Sonny's latest crisis will ripple through Port Charles, plunging the Corinthos family into a new level of turmoil. What began as whispers of a failed operation or a botched deal quickly escalates into something far more devastating. Whether Sonny has been arrested, betrayed, or narrowly escaped an assassination attempt, the damage is done. Trust fractures within the family, alliances shift, and those once protected by the Corinthos name now find themselves vulnerable. Michael, deeply conflicted over his father's past decisions, is torn between stepping up to stabilize the family legacy or distancing himself entirely. Christina, still reeling from the fallout of Daisy's accident and her own mistakes, may find herself retreating into silence or seeking guidance from unexpected sources. As for Donna and Avery, shielded as much as possible, they remain the unspoken reason everyone must find a way to survive this storm. Amid the chaos, a brief flicker of light emerges in the form of Emma, whose discovery of a stray puppy in the park brings a moment of peace to an otherwise dark time. Emma, ever compassionate and quick to form emotional connections, names the puppy Outback in homage to her family's past. She is determined to keep the dog unless someone comes forward with a claim. The joy of caring for the small creature gives Emma something tangible to focus on, especially as she feels increasingly isolated from her friends and confused about Vaughn's intentions. She begins taking the dog on walks through the park at the same time each day, subconsciously hoping that the dog's owner will appear, and yet, part of her dreads that possibility, afraid she'll lose the one innocent relationship in her life that hasn't been marred by secrets or lies. Eventually, Vaughn does emerge from the shadows, feigning surprise and gratitude as he lays claim to the puppy. His timing is suspiciously perfect, and though Emma hesitates, the sincerity in his voice makes it difficult to refuse him. The interaction feels rehearsed, almost too smooth, and Emma's instincts, sharpened from years of living with double agents and medical mysteries, whisper that something isn't right. Vaughn's sudden involvement in her life seems less about coincidence and more like a calculated step. While he speaks about rescuing animals and protecting the voiceless, Emma can't shake the sense that he is gathering information on her, using Outback as a tool to infiltrate her world and earn her trust. What Emma doesn't know is that Vaughn has been closely tracking her movements for weeks under orders connected to a larger mission involving Professor Dalton. Dalton, still hidden behind the polished walls of academia, has developed a growing interest in Emma. Not romantically, but politically and psychologically. He sees her as a threat to his rising influence among young activists, particularly within the animal rights movement that Emma has been spearheading. Vaughn, posing as a sympathetic ally, is tasked with both distracting her and dismantling her growing resistance against Dalton's secret experiments and manipulation of social movements. The puppy plot, while seemingly innocent, is the latest in a string of espionage tactics meant to weaken Emma's resolve and feed false information back to Dalton's camp. Meanwhile, across town, final preparations for Drew and Willow's wedding are underway. For many, the event is a chance to forget the chaos swirling through Port Charles, but for others, it's a powder keg waiting to explode. The ceremony, though carefully planned, is layered with tension. Willow, despite her composed exterior, harbors doubts that grow louder with each passing hour. She can't shake the feeling that Drew is hiding something critical that she's not meant to know until it's too late. As the day approaches, every look, every delay, every vague comment from Drew tightens the knot in her chest. And though she's tried to push away the memories of Michael, they haunt her in quiet moments, reminding her of a love that wasn't as dead as she once claimed. There remains the looming possibility that the wedding will not go as planned. Whether it's Nina, armed with one final desperate plea to stop her daughter from making a mistake, or a scandalous reveal about Drew's past, perhaps a rekindled affair or a secret betrayal, the atmosphere is charged with suspense. Rumors have already begun circulating about Drew's encounters with Nina that may have crossed the line, and if they come to light, it could detonate the entire event. Others believe that Jason or even Ava might interrupt, driven by motives of loyalty, revenge, or their own desire to expose buried truths. One thing is certain, the guests will not witness an ordinary union, and the consequences of what unfolds will ripple beyond the altar. As all these threads intertwine, the next 2 weeks promise to bring dramatic turning points to nearly every character in Port Charles. Old secrets will be unearthed, new alliances will form, and the fates of Sunny, Drew, Emma, and Willow will shift under pressure. No one is safe from the fallout. The Corinthos family faces implosion, Emma is caught in a web of manipulation disguised as friendship, and Willow must decide whether she is walking into love or into a lie. The town, already trembling beneath the weight of overlapping crises, braces itself for the next explosion. Every revelation threatens to reshape the power dynamics in ways no one can predict, and for the citizens of Port Charles, the 4th of July may come with more fireworks than anyone anticipated.